My name is Sarah Martinez, and I'm 28 years old. Right now I'm sitting in my car after my sister's wedding and my hands are still shaking from what just happened. I never thought that my mother's words at Madison's wedding would completely change my life. The humiliation I felt when she told me I only deserved dry bread in front of everyone was crushing. But what I did next shocked all 200 guests into complete silence. The looks on their faces, the gasps from the crowd, even my sister's expression of disbelief. Before I tell you about that life-changing night, let me know where you're watching from, and don't forget to hit that like button if you've ever felt undervalued by your own family. Now let me take you back to the evening that changed everything. Growing up as the older sister in the Martinez family taught me early that love wasn't distributed equally. I'm Sarah, the responsible one, the practical daughter who never quite measured up to my younger sister Madison's sparkle. Madison is 25, 3 years younger than me, but she's always been the golden child in my mother Patricia's eyes. My mother, Patricia Martinez, is 52 years old and has perfected the art of subtle favoritism over the decades. She never outright said she loved Madison more, but her actions spoke volumes. When it came time for high school, Madison was enrolled in the prestigious St. Catherine's Academy, while I attended the local public school, because as my mother explained, the family budget could only stretch so far for one private education. The comparisons started early and never stopped. Madison inherited our grandmother's delicate features and petite frame, while I got my father's broader shoulders and what my mother diplomatically called a more sturdy build. Madison's hair fell in perfect waves without effort, while mine required an arsenal of products to look presentable. These weren't just observations in our household. They were daily reminders of who was the prettier daughter. My father Robert, bless his heart, tried to stay neutral, but mostly remained silent during these comparisons. He's the type of man who believes that keeping peace is more important than keeping score, so he'd just retreat to his workshop whenever the tension became too thick. By the time we reached adulthood, the pattern was set in stone. When Madison decided to open her nail salon, our parents co-signed a loan and provided the down payment. When I wanted to pursue additional accounting certifications, I was told that investing in education was my own responsibility, since I already had a steady job. Currently, I work as a staff accountant at Henderson Associates, a mid-sized firm downtown. It's not glamorous work, but it pays the bills and gives me the stability I've always craved. My coworkers respect my attention to detail, and my supervisor recently hinted at a possible promotion. But in my mother's eyes, my steady paycheck and reliable nature paled in comparison to Madison's entrepreneurial spirit and her Instagram-worthy nail art. The wedding planning process revealed just how deep this favoritism ran. My mother spent months researching venues, insisting that only the Marriott's Grand Ballroom would do for her baby girl's special day. The budget ballooned to $50,000, money my parents had been saving for years. Every detail had to be perfect for Madison. My role in this fairy tale wedding was relegated to the background. While Madison's college friends were asked to be bridesmaids, I was assigned the practical tasks. I coordinated with vendors, managed the gift table, and handled the dozens of small crises that arise during wedding planning. When I suggested I might give a speech as the maid of honor, my mother quickly shut down the idea. She said speeches should be kept short and sweet, implying that I might ramble or say something inappropriate. The maid of honor duties went to Madison's best friend Jessica, while I was given the title of family coordinator, which sounded important but basically meant I was unpaid wedding staff. Despite all of this, I held on to hope that Madison's wedding might be different. Maybe seeing both her daughters together on such an important day would remind my mother that she had two children who loved her. Maybe the joy of the occasion would soften her heart and help her see that I had value too. The wedding was set for a Saturday evening in late September. The guest list included 200 people, mostly Madison's friends and our extended family. The venue was everything my mother had dreamed of, with crystal chandeliers, white roses everywhere, and a dance floor that would make any bride feel like a princess. As the wedding approached, I found myself genuinely excited for Madison. Despite everything, I loved my sister and wanted her to have the perfect day. Her fiancé Kevin seemed like a good man, a software engineer with a steady job and a kind disposition. He treated Madison well and seemed to genuinely adore her. I spent weeks shopping for the perfect dress, settling on a navy blue cocktail dress that cost me $200, a significant portion of my monthly budget. I wanted to look elegant and appropriate to blend in seamlessly with the other guests and not draw attention to myself for the wrong reasons. The more I thought about it, the more I convinced myself that this wedding could be a fresh start for our family relationships. Maybe after seeing Madison settled and happy, my mother would have room in her heart to appreciate her other daughter too. The morning of Madison's wedding arrived with the crisp promise of autumn. I woke up at 5 a.m, 3 hours before my alarm, my stomach churning with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. This was going to be a big day for our family, and despite all the complicated history, I was determined to make it beautiful for my sister. I had planned to do my own hair and makeup, having watched countless YouTube tutorials in preparation. My bathroom counter looked like a makeup store had exploded across it with foundation shades I'd tested at Sephora, eyeshadow palettes I'd researched for hours, and hair tools I'd borrowed from my neighbor. Meanwhile, Madison had a full glam squad arriving at the hotel at 8 a.m. My mother had hired a professional hairstylist, a makeup artist, and even a photographer to capture every moment of Madison's transformation. The contrast wasn't lost on me, but I pushed down any feelings of resentment. This was Madison's day. I arrived at the family home around 10 a.m. to help with final preparations. The house buzzed with activity as my aunts arranged flowers, and my cousins set up decorations that would later be transported to the venue. My mother was in full mother-of-the-bride mode, wearing her hair in curlers and a silk robe that read, "Madison's Mom," in gold script. When she saw me, she looked me up and down with a critical eye. "Well, you look acceptable," she said, which I supposed was better than criticism. "Your hair actually turned out decent. Just try not to draw attention to yourself today, okay? This is Madison's moment to shine." I nodded and smiled, biting back the response that formed in my throat. I busied myself with small tasks, folding programs, and arranging the emergency kit I'd prepared with safety pins, stain remover, and pain relievers. When Madison emerged from her room in full bridal glory, the entire house seemed to pause. She looked absolutely stunning in her $3,000 gown, her skin glowing from months of professional facials, her hair styled in an elaborate updo that had taken 2 hours to perfect. "Oh, my baby," my mother gasped, pressing her hands to her chest. "You look like an absolute princess, like something out of a fairy tale. I can't believe my little girl is getting married." Tears streamed down my mother's face as she fussed over Madison's dress, adjusting the train, and making sure every detail was perfect. The photographer captured every moment of this emotional scene, and I found myself stepping back to stay out of the frame. We arrived at the church 30 minutes before the ceremony. The afternoon sun streamed through the stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns across the wooden pews. The church was already half full with early arriving guests. I noticed that the first 2 rows on the bride's side were reserved for immediate family, but when the ushers guided me to my seat, I was placed in the 3rd row. The 2nd row was reserved for Madison's bridesmaids and their dates. When I asked about this, my mother explained that the traditional seating arrangement put the bridal party closest to the altar. During the ceremony, I watched my sister pledge her love to Kevin with genuine happiness in my heart. They looked perfect together, and Kevin's vows brought tears to my eyes. This was what love should look like: mutual respect, genuine affection, and partnership. My mother sobbed throughout the entire ceremony, dabbing her eyes with the special handkerchief she'd embroidered for the occasion. She'd spent weeks talking about how proud she was of Madison, how perfectly everything had turned out, how this was the happiest day of her life. After the ceremony, we moved to the Marriott for the reception. The ballroom had been transformed into a winter wonderland with white flowers, silver accents, and tiny lights that twinkled like stars. It was genuinely beautiful, and I felt proud that our family had created such a magical setting for Madison and Kevin. The cocktail hour buzzed with conversation, as guests admired the venue and caught up with relatives they hadn't seen in months. I mingled politely, taking photos with family members and making small talk with Madison's college friends. When it came time for dinner, I discovered I'd been assigned to table 8, which was near the back of the room and far from the family tables. My table companions were Kevin's co-workers and their spouses, nice people, but strangers to me. The head table, of course, seated Madison, Kevin, the wedding party, and both sets of parents. As I looked around the room, taking in the elegant centerpieces and the happy faces of the guests, I told myself that everything was going exactly as it should. This was Madison's night, and she deserved to be the center of attention. Table 8 turned out to be more enjoyable than I'd expected. Kevin's colleagues were warm and welcoming, asking genuine questions about my work and sharing stories about their own experiences in corporate America. There was something refreshing about talking to people who didn't know our family history and treated me as just another wedding guest. "So, what do you do for work?" asked Jennifer, a project manager at Kevin's tech company. She seemed genuinely interested, leaning forward as I explained my role in accounting. "I work for Henderson Associates," I replied. "I handle accounts receivable and help small businesses manage their books. It's not the most exciting work, but I find it satisfying to help people understand their finances." "That's so important," chimed in her husband Michael. "We've been looking for someone to help us organize our taxes and maybe set up a better system for tracking expenses. Do you ever do freelance work?" Before I could answer, I heard the distinctive sound of my mother's voice approaching our table. Patricia was making her rounds, checking on guests and ensuring everyone felt welcomed and entertained. "Oh, there's my other daughter," she announced to the table, her tone carrying that particular inflection that always made me cringe. "Sarah's always been the practical one in the family." The table smiled politely, and Jennifer continued our conversation. "We were just saying how valuable accounting skills are. Sarah was telling us about her work with small businesses." My mother's expression shifted slightly, that barely perceptible tightening around her eyes that I'd learned to recognize over the years. "Yes, well, Sarah has always been good with numbers. Very methodical. Very reliable." She paused, and I could sense what was coming. "Not like Madison, of course. Madison has real business instincts, you know. Natural entrepreneurial flair." The table fell into an uncomfortable silence. I tried to steer the conversation elsewhere. "Madison's salon is doing really well. She's built up quite a client base." "Oh, yes," my mother continued, warming to her favorite subject. "Madison's only 25 and she already owns her own business. She has such vision, such creativity. Her Instagram has over 10,000 followers, you know. She's even been featured in some local magazines." Michael nodded politely. "That's impressive. But steady work like Sarah's is really valuable too. Not everyone can be an entrepreneur." My mother's laugh had an edge to it. "Well, that's certainly true. Sarah's always been more of a follower than a leader. Some people are meant for steady behind-the-scenes work, and some people are meant to shine." I felt my cheeks burning, but I managed to keep my voice level. "Both types of work are important, Mom. The economy needs people in all different roles." "Of course, dear," she replied, patting my shoulder in a way that felt more condescending than comforting. "You found your niche. It's just that Madison has such ambition, such drive. At 25, she's already accomplished so much more than most people do by 30. The implication was clear to everyone at the table. I was 28, and in my mother's estimation, had accomplished far less than my younger sister. Jennifer and Michael exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable with the direction the conversation had taken. "Actually," Jennifer said, trying to rescue the situation, "I think what Sarah does sounds really challenging. Managing books for multiple businesses requires a lot of skill and attention to detail." My mother waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, it's fine work for someone who likes routine. Sarah's always preferred the safety of a steady paycheck to the excitement of building something from scratch. She's not a risk-taker like Madison." The words stung, because there was just enough truth in them to hurt. I had chosen security over uncertainty, steady income over the possibility of greater rewards. But hearing my life choices dismissed so casually in front of strangers was humiliating. "Madison's salon grossed 6 figures in its first year," my mother continued, oblivious to the discomfort she was causing. "She's already looking at opening a second location. That's the difference between having vision and just having a job." I excused myself from the table, claiming I needed to use the restroom. Really, I needed a moment to compose myself before I said something I'd regret. As I walked away, I could hear my mother continuing to extol Madison's virtues to my increasingly uncomfortable table mates. In the bathroom, I stared at myself in the mirror and tried to remember why I was here. This was Madison's wedding day. I was here to celebrate her happiness, not to compete for my mother's approval. I could get through the rest of the evening with grace and dignity. When I returned to the table, my mother had moved on to charming other guests. The conversation had shifted to safer topics like the beautiful venue and the delicious dinner. but I could feel the sympathetic glances from my table mates, and I knew they'd witnessed something that made them uncomfortable. The damage was done, but I tried to salvage the rest of the evening by focusing on the positive. The food was excellent, the music was lovely, and seeing Madison so happy made all the awkwardness worthwhile. The dinner portion of the evening concluded with the usual wedding traditions. Madison and Kevin had their first dance to At Last, by Etta James, looking completely lost in each other as they swayed to the music. My father danced with Madison next, tears in his eyes, as he spun his youngest daughter around the dance floor. I watched from my table, genuinely moved by the tender moments unfolding before me. Despite all the family complications, these were the moments that mattered. Love, commitment, and the celebration of two people choosing to build a life together. After the formal dances concluded, it was time for the cake-cutting ceremony. Madison and Kevin's wedding cake was a 3-tiered masterpiece covered in delicate sugar flowers that matched Madison's bouquet. It had been ordered from Bella's Bakery, the most exclusive cake shop in the city, and had cost nearly $800. The photographer gathered the crowd around the cake table, and Madison and Kevin posed with the silver cake knife. The moment was picture-perfect, the happy couple laughing as they cut into the bottom tier, while their guests applauded and camera flashes illuminated their faces. "Make sure you get some on his nose," someone called out, and Madison giggled as she playfully dabbed a tiny bit of frosting on Kevin's cheek. The crowd erupted in laughter and more applause. After the official photos were taken, Madison began the tradition of personally serving cake to the most important guests. She cut generous slices and handed them out with hugs and kisses, starting with her new in-laws, and then moving to our parents. I stood with the other guests, waiting patiently for my turn. As Madison's sister, I expected to be among the first to receive a piece from her hands, but she moved through the crowd, serving aunts, uncles, and close friends first. I told myself she was probably saving family for last, wanting to spend extra time with each relative. But as the minutes ticked by, I watched Madison continue to serve cake to guest after guest, never making eye contact with me. Soon she had served nearly 20 people, and the supply of pre-cut pieces was running low. Rather than continue waiting, I decided to approach the cake table myself. After all, I was family, and surely it would be fine for me to serve myself a small piece. The cake looked absolutely delicious, with layers of vanilla sponge and what appeared to be raspberry filling. I had just picked up the cake server when I heard my mother's voice behind me. "Sarah, what are you doing?" I turned around, surprised by the sharp tone in her voice. "I was just going to cut myself a piece of cake, Mom. Madison seems busy with the other guests." My mother's expression was stern, almost scandalized. "That cake cost $800, Sarah. It's made with imported Belgian chocolate and organic vanilla from Madagascar. The flowers alone took the baker 6 hours to create." I was confused by her reaction. "I know it's beautiful, Mom. I just wanted to taste a small piece. It's a wedding cake. Isn't it meant to be shared?" "With the right people, yes," she replied, moving closer to the cake table as if to block my access. "Madison specifically requested this cake from Bella's Bakery. Do you have any idea how exclusive that place is? They only take a limited number of orders each month." Other guests were beginning to notice our conversation. I could feel eyes turning toward us, but I tried to keep my voice low and respectful. "I understand it's special, Mom. I'm not trying to take more than my share. I just thought it would be nice to taste Madison's wedding cake." My mother looked me up and down, her gaze taking in my off-the-rack dress, my self-styled hair, and my discount department store shoes. When she spoke again, her voice carried a coldness that made my blood freeze. "Honey, with your simple lifestyle and basic tastes, you wouldn't even be able to appreciate something this sophisticated. This cake is for people who understand quality, who can recognize fine ingredients and artisanal craftsmanship." I felt like I'd been slapped. Around us, conversations were quieting as people sensed the tension. "Mom, what are you trying to say?" She sighed, as if explaining something to a child. "Sarah, you've always been perfectly content with simple, ordinary things. You shop at Target, you drive a used car, you live in that little apartment with the basic furnishings. There's nothing wrong with that lifestyle, but it means you're not really equipped to appreciate luxury when you see it." My hands were shaking now, but I tried one more time to diffuse the situation. "I understand that the cake is expensive and beautiful. I'm not asking for a huge piece. I just wanted to participate in the celebration." That's when my mother delivered the words that would change everything between us forever. "Sarah," she said loud enough for at least 20 people to hear clearly, "someone with your simple tastes and modest means only deserves dry bread. This cake is for people who have earned the right to enjoy the finer things in life." The words hit me like a physical blow. "You only deserve dry bread," said by my own mother, at my sister's wedding, in front of a crowd of family and friends. The conversations around us stopped completely. I could feel people staring, some with their mouths slightly open, others looking away in embarrassment. The silence stretched for what felt like hours but was probably only 10 or 15 seconds. Madison, who had been laughing with friends across the room, looked over and saw me standing frozen by the cake table with our mother. Even from 20 feet away, I could see the confusion on her face as she took in the scene. Kevin's parents, who had been chatting nearby, were staring at my mother with expressions of shock and disapproval. Other guests were beginning to whisper among themselves, clearly uncomfortable with what they'd witnessed. But my mother wasn't finished. "I'm not trying to be cruel, Sarah. I'm just being realistic. You've chosen a life of simplicity and frugality. There's honor in that. But it also means that certain experiences, certain pleasures aren't really meant for you." I stood there holding the cake server in my trembling hand, unable to form words. In that moment, 28 years of subtle put-downs, casual dismissals, and constant comparisons crystallized into this one devastating sentence: "You only deserve dry bread." The silence that followed my mother's words felt eternal. I stood there, cake server still in my hand, as 200 wedding guests processed what they had just witnessed. Some looked away in embarrassment, others stared in shock, and a few whispered urgently to their companions. For 28 years, I had accepted my role as the lesser daughter, the practical one, the child who didn't quite measure up. I had internalized every comparison, every dismissal, every casual cruelty disguised as honest assessment. But standing there in that ballroom, surrounded by witnesses to my mother's ultimate judgment of my worth, something inside me finally snapped. I set down the cake server carefully, my hands steadier now than they had been in hours. The trembling had stopped, replaced by a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't going to run to the bathroom to cry. I wasn't going to quietly retreat to my table and pretend nothing had happened. I wasn't going to smile and nod and accept this treatment one more time. Instead, I walked purposefully toward the small stage where the DJ had set up his equipment. The band was on a break, and the microphone sat unused on its stand. I had never given a speech in my life, never sought the spotlight, never demanded attention. But tonight was going to be different. I stepped up onto the small platform and reached for the microphone. The feedback squeal that resulted when I turned it on was sharp enough to get everyone's attention. Conversation stopped, heads turned, and suddenly 200 people were looking at me. "Excuse me, everyone," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the sound system. "I'd like to say a few words." I could see Madison near the cake table, her face a mixture of confusion and concern. Kevin had moved to stand beside her, his hand resting protectively on her waist. My parents stood frozen, my father's face pale and my mother's expression shifting from surprise to horror as she realized what was happening. "My name is Sarah Martinez," I continued, "and I'm Madison's older sister. I wasn't asked to give a speech tonight, but I think it's time I finally spoke up." The room was completely silent now, except for the hum of the air conditioning and the distant sounds of kitchen staff cleaning up dinner plates. Even the children seemed to sense the gravity of the moment and had stopped their chatter. I want to start by saying how much I love my sister Madison. Growing up with her has been one of the greatest joys of my life. I've watched her grow from a curious little girl into the beautiful, successful woman you see today. Madison, you deserve all the happiness in the world, and Kevin, you're getting an incredible wife. Madison's eyes filled with tears and she mouthed, "Thank you," from across the room. Some of the tension in the crowd seemed to ease. This was starting like a traditional sister of the bride speech. "But tonight," I continued, "I learned something about family that broke my heart into pieces. I learned that sometimes the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally are the ones who place the harshest conditions on that love." The atmosphere shifted again. People began to exchange glances, sensing that this speech was heading somewhere unexpected. My mother took a step forward, as if she might try to stop me, but my father caught her arm. "A few minutes ago, someone who should love me more than anyone else in this world told me that I only deserve dry bread. She said this because I'm not fancy enough, not successful enough, not worthy enough to share in the same simple pleasures as everyone else. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Several people looked directly at my mother, who had gone completely white. Madison covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes wide with shock and dawning understanding. "You know what?" I said, my voice growing stronger. "Maybe she's right. Maybe I do only deserve dry bread." The confusion on people's faces was palpable. Where was I going with this? Because dry bread represents something that this family has forgotten how to value. Dry bread is honest. It's real. It's sustenance without pretense. It doesn't try to be something it's not, and it doesn't apologize for being simple. I paused, looking out over the crowd, making eye contact with individuals who were hanging on every word. Dry bread is authentic, and apparently authenticity isn't valued much in this family. But you know what? I'd rather be genuine dry bread than fake fancy cake any day of the week. Some people in the crowd began to nod slightly. I could see understanding dawning on faces throughout the room. And since we're talking about authenticity, I think it's time I shared something authentic with all of you tonight. I reached into my small purse and pulled out a folded envelope I'd been carrying for weeks, waiting for the right moment to share the news with my family. Tonight had certainly become that moment, though not in the way I had originally planned. 6 months ago, I started my own bookkeeping and financial consulting business. I didn't tell my family because I wanted to make sure it was successful before I announced it. I wanted to have something concrete to show them. The crowd was completely riveted now. Even the catering staff had stopped their work to listen. Last month, I signed contracts with 3 major clients. My little business, the one I've been running from my simple apartment with my basic furnishings, is now on track to gross $200,000 in its first year. The gasps were audible this time. I could see people's eyebrows rising, could sense the shift in the room's energy. My mother looked like she might faint. "But that's not all," I continued. "Yesterday I closed on my first house. Not a condo, not a rental property, but an actual 3-bedroom house with a yard and a 2-car garage. I paid 20% down, and my mortgage payment is less than what most people pay in rent." Kevin's father, who I knew was a successful businessman, began to smile slightly. Several other guests were nodding with approval and what looked like respect. And this morning before this wedding, I received a call from Patterson Industries. They want to hire me as their full-time financial consultant. The salary they offered is more than double what I make at my current job. The room was buzzing now with whispered conversations. I could see people looking at me with new interest, with respect I'd never received from my own family. I kept all of this quiet because I wanted to surprise my family. I thought maybe if I achieved enough success, if I proved myself worthy enough, I might finally earn the love and respect I've been seeking my whole life. My voice caught slightly on these words, but I pushed through. But tonight, I realized something important. I don't need to earn anyone's love or respect. I certainly don't need to prove my worth to people who have already decided I'm only worth dry bread. I looked directly at my mother for the first time since I'd taken the microphone. "Madison, I love you more than you'll ever know, and I wish you and Kevin a lifetime of happiness together. You deserve every beautiful thing this world has to offer." Madison was crying now, tears streaming down her carefully made-up face. Kevin had his arm around her shoulders, and both of them were staring at me with expressions of amazement and something that looked like pride. But I won't stay in a place where my worth is constantly questioned, where my accomplishments are dismissed, and where I'm told I don't deserve the same basic kindness extended to everyone else. I set the microphone back on its stand and stepped down from the platform. The room erupted in applause, led by my Aunt Linda, who was clapping enthusiastically from her table near the front. Kevin's parents joined in, as did most of the guests throughout the room. The sound was overwhelming, washing over me like a wave of validation I'd never experienced before. People were standing now, giving me a standing ovation that went on for what felt like several minutes. The immediate aftermath of my speech was surreal. As the applause finally died down, I found myself surrounded by people I barely knew, all of them wanting to shake my hand or offer words of congratulation. Kevin's uncle, who I learned was the CEO of a mid-sized manufacturing company, pushed through the crowd to reach me. "Sarah," he said, extending his business card. I had no idea Kevin's new sister-in-law was such an accomplished businesswoman. We've been looking for someone exactly like you to help streamline our accounting department. Would you be interested in discussing a consulting opportunity?" Before I could respond, Jennifer from my dinner table appeared at my elbow. "Sarah, after what we witnessed earlier, I have to say I'm even more impressed by your professionalism. My husband and I would love to hire you to organize our finances. Could we set up a meeting next week?" The business cards and offers kept coming. Kevin's college roommate wanted help with his startup's books. One of Madison's bridesmaids' mothers owned a chain of boutiques and needed a financial consultant. Even some of my distant relatives, people I saw maybe once a year at family gatherings, were approaching me with newfound respect and interest. But the person I most wanted to see was my sister. Madison had been standing near the cake table throughout my speech, and now she was making her way through the crowd toward me, her wedding dress trailing behind her like a cloud. When she reached me, she didn't say a word. She just threw her arms around me and held me tight, not caring if she wrinkled her expensive gown or smudged her makeup against my shoulder. "Sarah," she whispered in my ear, "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I had no idea Mom said that to you. I should have been paying attention. I should have protected you." We held each other for a long moment while the crowd continued to buzz around us. When we finally pulled apart, Madison's eyes were red with tears, but her expression was fierce with determination. "I've been a terrible sister," she continued. "I've let Mom treat you badly for years, and I never spoke up because I was afraid of losing her approval. But what you just did, standing up for yourself like that, it was the bravest thing I've ever seen." "Madison, this is your wedding day," I said, trying to deflect her apology. "You don't need to worry about family drama tonight." "Yes, I do," she insisted, "because family means protecting each other, and I haven't been protecting you. That changes now." Kevin appeared beside us, having finally made his way through the crowd. His expression was serious, almost somber. "Sarah," he said, "I owe you an apology too. I've been part of this family for 3 years now, and I've seen how differently you get treated. I should have said something. What your mother said tonight was completely unacceptable, and what you did in response was incredible." Before I could respond, I heard my father's voice behind me. "Sarah, honey, can we talk?" I turned to find my dad standing there, looking older than I'd ever seen him. His face was pale and his hands were shaking slightly. "Dad," I said carefully, "what is it?" "I need to apologize to you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've been a coward for too many years. I've watched your mother treat you unfairly, and I've stayed quiet because I thought keeping peace was more important than standing up for what's right." He paused, struggling to find the words. "But tonight, hearing her say those things to you, watching you have to defend your own worth to your own family, I realize that my silence has been just as harmful as her words. I should have protected you. I should have been the father you deserved." The conversation was interrupted by the approach of my mother, who had been conspicuously absent during the congratulations and apologies. Patricia looked stricken, her carefully styled hair now slightly disheveled, her makeup showing the strain of the evening's events. "Sarah," she began, but I held up my hand. "Mom, not here. Not now. This is Madison's wedding, and I've already disrupted it enough." "But I need to explain," she insisted. "I didn't mean it the way it sounded." The crowd around us had grown quiet, sensing another confrontation brewing. Madison stepped closer to me, a gesture of solidarity that didn't go unnoticed. "Yes, you did," I said simply. "And that's okay. At least now I know exactly where I stand." My mother's face crumpled, but before she could respond, Aunt Linda appeared and gently took her arm. "Patricia, I think you've said enough for one evening," Linda said firmly. "Let's let the kids enjoy the rest of the celebration." As my mother was led away, I turned back to Madison and Kevin. Despite everything that had happened, I wanted their night to end on a positive note. "You two should get back to your guests," I said. "This is your party, and everyone's here to celebrate your marriage." "Are you going to stay?" Madison asked hopefully. I looked around the room, taking in the faces of the people who had witnessed my moment of truth. Some were family members who were still processing what they'd seen. Others were new acquaintances who suddenly viewed me as someone worth knowing. The dynamic had shifted completely in the span of 20 minutes. "Yes," I said finally. "I think I will stay." The remainder of the wedding celebration took on a completely different tone after my speech. Where I had previously been invisible, relegated to the background of my sister's big day, I now found myself at the center of attention in the most unexpected way. The dance floor beckoned as the band resumed playing, but instead of the typical wedding playlist, they seemed to be choosing songs with more energy, more celebration. Kevin's father, a distinguished man in his early 60s, approached me with a warm smile. "Sarah, would you do me the honor of a dance?" he asked, extending his hand. "I think we have a lot to talk about." As we moved onto the dance floor, he leaned in close enough to speak over the music. "You know, Kevin's told me stories about his future in-laws, but he never mentioned how impressive his sister-in-law was. That speech took real courage." "Thank you," I replied, still somewhat bewildered by the positive response I was receiving. I never intended to make a scene at Madison's wedding. "Sometimes scenes make themselves," he said wisely. "The question is whether you handle them with grace or let them handle you. You chose grace." Throughout the dance, other guests approached us, wanting to continue conversations that had started after my speech. The manufacturing company CEO confirmed his interest in hiring me for a major consulting project. 2 other business owners left their contact information with Kevin, asking him to pass it along to me. By the time the evening wound down, I had collected more business cards than I could fit in my small purse, and had scheduled 3 meetings for the following week. More importantly, I had experienced something I'd never felt at a family gathering before: respect. Madison and Kevin's grand exit was scheduled for 11 o'clock, complete with sparklers and rose petals. As the time approached, I helped gather the guests outside the hotel entrance for the send-off. Madison pulled me aside one final time before she and Kevin climbed into the decorated limousine that would take them to their wedding night suite. "Sarah, I want you to know that everything changes after tonight," she said, gripping my hands tightly. "I'm not going to let Mom treat you the way she has been. Kevin and I talked about it, and we both agree that what happened tonight was unacceptable." "Madison, you don't need to fight my battles," I told her. "I can take care of myself." "I know you can," she replied. "You proved that tonight. But sisters should support each other, and I haven't been supporting you. That's going to change." As the sparklers lit up the night, and Madison and Kevin drove away in a shower of rose petals and well wishes, I felt a sense of closure I hadn't expected. This day had begun with me feeling like the invisible, undervalued sister, and it was ending with me feeling seen and respected for the first time in years. The months that followed Madison's wedding brought changes I could never have anticipated. My consulting business exploded with new clients, many of whom had been at the wedding and witnessed my impromptu speech. Word of mouth traveled quickly in our city's business community, and soon I was booked solid with projects that challenged and excited me. The Patterson Industries job offer turned out to be even better than I had initially understood. Not only was the salary significantly higher than anything I had previously earned, but the position came with equity in the company and the potential for rapid advancement. Within 6 months of the wedding, I had moved into my new house, hired 2 part-time employees to help with my growing client base, and been featured in the local business journal as an up-and-coming entrepreneur to watch. But the most significant changes were in my family relationships. Madison kept her promise about standing up for me. When our mother made one of her typical dismissive comments during a family dinner, Madison immediately called her out on it. "Mom, that's exactly the kind of comment that hurt Sarah so badly at my wedding," Madison said firmly. "Sarah is successful and accomplished, and she deserves the same respect you'd give anyone else." My father also began to change. He started calling me regularly, asking about my business and expressing genuine interest in my life. For the first time, I felt like I had a real relationship with him, not just the polite distance that had characterized our interactions for years. The relationship with my mother proved more complicated. She attempted several apologies in the months following the wedding, but they all came with qualifications and explanations that showed she didn't fully understand the impact of her behavior. "I never meant to hurt you," she would say. "I was just trying to encourage you to reach for more." Eventually, I had to set clear boundaries. I would attend family gatherings and maintain a cordial relationship, but I would no longer accept being treated as a lesser member of the family. When she made comparisons between Madison and me, I would calmly change the subject, or if necessary, leave the room. The most unexpected outcome was how the story of my wedding speech spread beyond our family and social circle. Kevin's aunt, who worked in marketing, had recorded part of my speech on her phone and shared it with friends. Soon I was being asked to speak at women's networking events and professional conferences about standing up for yourself and recognizing your own worth. My dry bread metaphor resonated with audiences in ways I never could have predicted. Women approached me after these speaking engagements to share their own stories of feeling undervalued or overlooked in their families or careers. "Your speech gave me permission to stop apologizing for being myself," one woman told me after a conference presentation. I realized I'd been spending so much energy trying to prove my worth to people who had already decided I wasn't valuable. As I reflect on that transformative night 2 years later, sitting in the office of my now thriving financial consulting firm, I'm struck by how one moment of refusing to accept unacceptable treatment changed the entire trajectory of my life. My relationship with Madison has never been stronger. She and Kevin have become some of my closest friends, and Madison frequently refers clients to my business. She's also become fiercely protective of our relationship, making it clear to our mother that any disrespect toward me is disrespect toward her as well. My father and I have built the relationship I always wished we had. He regularly stops by my office just to chat, and he's become one of my biggest champions, proudly telling his friends about his successful daughter's business accomplishments. The situation with my mother has stabilized into a kind of detente. She seems to understand that the dynamic between us has permanently shifted, and while she may never fully comprehend the damage her years of favoritism caused, she's learned to treat me with basic respect. But perhaps the most important change has been internal. I no longer seek validation from people who have proven incapable of providing it. I've learned to recognize my own worth independent of anyone else's opinion, and I've discovered that self-respect is far more valuable than the approval of others. The business success that followed my wedding speech has been gratifying, but it wasn't the speech itself that changed my life. It was the decision to stop accepting treatment that diminished my sense of self-worth. It was choosing to believe that I deserved better even when the people closest to me suggested otherwise. I've learned that authenticity isn't always comfortable or convenient, but it's always worthwhile. When you stop pretending to be smaller than you are to make others comfortable, you create space for your true self to emerge and thrive. The dry bread comment that was meant to put me in my place actually freed me from a place I should never have been confined to in the first place. Sometimes the most hurtful statements can become the catalysts for the most positive changes in your life. I think about that moment often when I'm working with clients who undervalue themselves or accept less than they deserve in their professional lives. I share my story, not as a tale of revenge or triumph over family dysfunction, but as an example of what becomes possible when you decide to advocate for yourself with courage and grace. My mother's words were meant to diminish me to remind me of what she saw as my proper place in the family hierarchy. Instead, they became the push I needed to finally step into my full potential and claim the life I had been too afraid to pursue. Now, when someone tries to convince me that I should accept less than I deserve, or that my standards are too high, or that I should be grateful for crumbs when I could have the whole meal, I remember that night at Madison's wedding. I remember the power that came from finally saying no to being treated poorly. And I remember that sometimes the most radical thing you can do is simply refuse to accept unacceptable treatment. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stand up and tell your truth even when your voice shakes, and even when you're not sure anyone will listen. The question I always leave people with is this: what would you do if someone told you that you only deserve dry bread? Would you accept their assessment of your worth? Or would you show them what you're really made of? Because here's what I learned that night, and in all the days since. You teach people how to treat you by what you're willing to accept. And when you stop accepting treatment that diminishes your worth, you don't just change how others see you. You change how you see yourself. That wedding taught me that sometimes the most beautiful transformations come from the ugliest moments. Sometimes you have to be willing to make people uncomfortable with your truth before they'll see your value. And sometimes you have to be willing to shock people with your strength before they'll stop underestimating your worth. So I ask you, are you ready to stand up for your worth? Are you prepared to show the world what you're truly capable of? Because your voice matters. Your truth has power, and you deserve so much more than dry bread. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, please share it with someone who might need to hear it. Hit that like button if you've ever felt undervalued by people who should have supported you. Subscribe for more stories about finding your strength and claiming your worth. And most importantly, leave a comment below. telling me about a time when you stood up for yourself or when you wish you had found the courage to do so. Your stories inspire others to find their own courage, and together we can remind each other that we all deserve a seat at the table, not just the crumbs that fall from it. Until next time, remember that your worth isn't determined by how others treat you, but by how you choose to treat yourself.